So welcome, our beloved sister Tina. We so appreciate your leadership. And as always at Setsi, we begin all things by acknowledging and giving thanks to our creator. We give thanks to the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So Tina, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and share a bit about your remarkable work?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Such an honor, Victor, to be here and to have this conversation with you. Yeah, so I have been working in international development, or rather, I should just say impact. I think impact is sort of a bit more all in, in scoping, but I have been working in impact space for probably 14 years now. A lot of that has been on the continent, so working primarily across Southern and Eastern Africa on a lot of socioeconomic innovation, really around micro enterprise development, looking at the informal sector, thinking around how can we really bridge the gap for women and youth across the continent, across different sectors to make sure that they are able to elevate themselves from conditions that they find themselves in, right? Whether it's social, whether it's economic inequality. And then same in Canada, I work in the tech space at the moment, really around innovation. I lead one programming here in Toronto, which is more around supporting Black founders. Yeah, and just making sure we have access to a lot of the resources that we would need to scale our ventures, whether here in Canada or globally. So thinking around access to coaching, access to capital, access to community, that's such a key part for a lot of our founders as well. And yeah, so I do that. I do a lot of other things in the community as well. So just really supporting organizations as well around their social impact, thinking around innovative business models that can really amplify change in the community as well.
Ashe, thank you so much for your leadership and almost two
Thank
decades of remarkable work in international development and impact. I really
you.
appreciate your leadership, your candor, and your consistent authenticity. So my next question, what inspires you right now? What has you curious or what keeps you up at night?
Uh, that's a really good question. Like what keeps me up at night? What keeps me going? What motivates me? I was born and raised in Cameroon. So I was born in Cameroon, grew up here in Canada. I came when I was around 11, 12 years old. But I think just being in Cameroon, I always had this question of like, why do some folks have and others don't? Because I see that everybody works hard, right? Like everybody is working hard. All the mothers and fathers are going to work. They have side hustles, businesses here and there. So why is it that despite all of this hard work and all of this effort, some are still not able to make ends meet, right? So I think early on, I started having that question of like, there has to be something beyond the person's ability to actually work hard or not work hard at all. And then as I got older, I started learning a lot around just systemic issues, challenges, changes, and the fact that you can work hard, but if you don't have access to market, you're not going to be able to sell your product, right? So just seeing that as a child, recognizing a lot of those issues, and also seeing that from folks who are pretty close to me, right? So like my grandmother, for example, a paternal grandmother, a farmer, leveraged the land, raised all of her kids from the farm. She would harvest, add value to the product, and sell. And just seeing the entrepreneurship from her, I had that conviction very early on, and that's all that folks needed, right? You need access to resources and you need that training to be able to make that change for yourself. So I think that's what pretty much keeps me going because I've seen it happen. And I think beyond, people's ability to work hard and change their life, a lot of these issues that make it challenging for them to do so needs to be addressed. So that's sort of what keeps me going, what keeps me motivated to do the work we do.
That's beautiful. You represent us well and you make our ancestors proud. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah. So,
Thank you.
what challenges and barriers do you face in your work, and what are some of the approaches you take to overcome some of these challenges and barriers?
I mean, we work in the nonprofit space, right? So a lot of the challenges is really around funding. And just that's one challenge is really around funding to make sure that we're able to keep these initiatives going. So that's always top of mind. How do you actually get good funding because there's funding and there's good funding. So how do you get this funding to keep the programs running, whether on the continent or here? And how do you create programs that are sustainable in a way, right? So that could be self-sustaining, that can continuously provide support to those that need them at different stages that they're needed. So that's the challenge. I think one of the ways that really I have been working in solving for this, and this is again on my work on the continent, is really looking at all the different players and seeing how we can bring them together and making sure that we're sharing resources, right? We're not duplicating efforts. So we're sharing resources. Like for example, I was working in Swaziland for about 2 years, and I was leading a project to organize a lot of the weavers. So there was a social enterprise that was working with basket weavers across the country. And these women were sort of just organized informally as clusters. And over time, they weren't getting really good business, right? So like they're working with this one social enterprise, but they're not really able to scale, they're not able to grow their production abilities, and that means that they're not able to increase their income, right? So my role really was to kind of help them reorganize as either cooperatives or association, depending on the structure. And that couldn't really work if we didn't have buy-in from like a lot of the other local partners, right? So like you have Ministry of Cooperative Development, you have SECO, you have other like financial institutions that would, their focus is women, primarily in rural communities. So you're thinking around within a local economy, what are some of those key players that you can really bring together within the local ecosystem who can, even if that funding goes out, like, a lot of the funding, external funding, unfortunately, or fortunately, but so bringing a lot of like the local partners together so like they can actually have that ownership of the initiative, and then they can, go ahead and continuously implement. So even now that the project itself has officially ended, so to speak, the training is continuous, right? So these women now are embedded within the Ministry of Cooperative Development's mandate, and they're continuously training them around microfinance, lending, all of that within like their own individual cooperatives. And then also continuously training them around production. So they're able to like manage like their own production abilities and manage their finances as a business. So that's kind of one way that I've been able to do it in the past. Um, in the Canadian context, it's a bit difficult to do that, just because you have, it's harder to kind of have that communal ownership, I guess, in the spaces. We kind of more rely on government funding, we rely on other individual donors, we rely on family offices and all these different things. But having a structure where an institution is able to, at some point down the line, be self-sufficient, I think that's the goal, and that's something that we're still trying to figure out in our context.
Incredible. I greatly appreciate your visionary leadership and all the work that you've done on the ground and the context that you provided us. I give thanks. So my next question, do you have a set of key priorities right now in your work?
One thing for me that is pretty key right now is access to capital. I think that's a huge, huge gap, whether it's access to capital for entrepreneurs, access to capital for organizations, Black-led organizations, access to capital to any sort of ecosystem player, right? That is within that space of how do we create social and economic change for the community. I know like just drawing from like the venture space now, because that's where I'm in, access to capital continuously is declining, right? Even though Black founders continuously receive less relative to other demographic. But I think 2023, the numbers were even lower relative to previous years. And then even, I'm not sure about a lot of the other partners, you're finding that maybe priorities from like corporate sponsors, government priorities are shifting from the Black community. So how do we actually have and maintain that steady stream of capital to fund programming that affect the community, so it's not shifting priorities, right? And then maybe one cycle there's funding available, and another cycle there is no funding. So that's a huge focus for me at the moment. And a couple of colleagues of mine, we're working a few initiatives to think around, primarily focused on the continent. So how do we create ecosystems to support access to capital and coaching for these founders, but primarily access to capital, and thinking around different ways that we can make that a bit more sustainable.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So my second last question, what is your ultimate goal? And what does success look like and feel like to you and your colleagues?
Oh my gosh, you're asking all the hard questions. What is the ultimate goal? Honestly, I think ultimate goal is just self-reliance for us as a people, right? I think that's when we look at our institutions, we look at individuals within the institutions, do we have the resources to address our own problems? We're a long way from that, just giving that the way that capital is organized globally. But I think the long goal is that we have some ownership of where the capital is coming from and how we deploy that capital within the community. We have that freedom in a way to freely address our issues, not necessarily just because it's priority for, you know, leaders and global leaders and whatnot, but because it's a priority for us and it's been a priority for us for a long time, and will be continuously a priority for us for a long time. But I think it's really that ownership, being able to have that ownership of resources where we can deploy into communities, deploy into organizations. I think and success for me is that, right? Success for me is us being able to identify these issues within our community and um, being able to tap within the community for the relevant resources that we need and take action and being able to do so very quickly. And it means being, again, just means being able to self-govern, being able to be able to have that direction for ourselves and our communities, whether on the continent or in the diaspora.
That's beautiful. I feel like that's been the vision of our ancestors for so long, and I
Yeah.
appreciate you once again just shining a spotlight on what's sovereignty and self-determination should and could look like. Greatly appreciate your leadership, family. You know, I mean, you represent us well. You make our ancestors proud. So my last question: do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners and our viewers?
I mean, my call to action really is just let's collaborate more. You know, like we have I know I'm talking about resources and ownership, but we do still have a lot of resources within the community. We need to find them, we need to bring them together. We need to figure out how to collaborate more in a way where we are, I'm so big on this, we're not duplicating efforts, you know, we're not doing something that another organization's doing in a specific region. How do we spread out resources so we're covering, you know, communities across the country, outside of the country, if that's part of the mandate. But yeah, it's really, let's collaborate more. Let's find out where the resources are. How can we align, make sure that we're deploying them in more efficient ways. So it could be human resources, it could be capital, financial capital, it could be a lot of different things. But yeah, that would be my call to action.
Incredible.
Mm.
I so give thanks. I give thanks. I give thanks, Madasi Pa, for your leadership, for your tenacity, for your authenticity, and all that you do for so many. And as always at Setsi, we'll close the way we began this conversation by acknowledging and giving thanks to our creator, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our elders and ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. And as always, as we walk towards greater sovereignty, liberation, and collectivism, we give thanks.
Amazing. Thank you, Victor. Thank you for the amazing work that you do and the work that Setsi does as well. Very much needed.
Sure.